Hey guys, Tyler Jackson here, the owner and operator of Playsheet Sports and the host of the Playsheet Sports podcast. I want to thank you guys for listening. This week's episode is brought to you by the folks at Princeton Healthcare Center, First Community Bank, and Raynell Medical Center. This week I'm joined by Taylor Kennedy of HD Media. We were both at the state tournament the last 2 weeks covering the girls and boys state championships. We talk about some of our observations from the tournaments and some of the takeaways from the all-state teams this year and some of the lessons that we learned and what we take away from all this. Before we dive into all that, we'll get a word from our sponsors.
For the past 4 decades, Princeton Healthcare Center has provided a quality experience for countless families to give them a warm and safe senior living environment. We're much more than a nursing home, offering skilled nursing services in a long-term care community. If you're looking for a skilled nursing facility that is as compassionate as it is comprehensive, look no further. Contact us today to schedule a tour for you or your loved one. Princeton Healthcare Center, a commitment to caring.
I want to welcome you all to the Playsheet Sports podcast. I'm Tyler Jackson, the owner and operator of PlaysheetSports.com, and I'm always joined by special guests, but I'm joined today by Taylor Kennedy from HD Media. I guess multimedia journalist is probably a good way to describe it, or what is it? You did a documentary too, a little bit back for football season when the championships returned to Laidley Field. But Taylor, I want to. How are you doing today? It was a long 2 weeks of basketball, but it was fun.
Yeah, I felt the longest 2 weeks of basketball, but also I was able to catch up on some sleep. But at the same time, I'm going to catch up on more sleep tonight because I want to sleep great because I just finished playing some basketball. So I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight. I slept like a baby yesterday, so back-to-back nights of sleep like a baby is the best way to go.
Absolutely. I woke up this morning, probably around 8:30 or so, but I don't think I moved at all last night in my sleep because my back was stiff, and I was like, man, like it feels good to be back in your own bed, though. I know for you it's different because you live in the Charleston area, but for me, I'm usually staying up in Charleston for those 2 weeks, so it's a bit of a relief. I come back a day or two in between, and I head right back up. But we're recapping the state tournament, and obviously with some of the projects you've done over the last 5 or 6, 7 years, you're pretty familiar in the basketball scene as well. And the first thing I want to start off with was, what was kind of your biggest takeaway from this state tournament? Because for me, I looked at it and I was kind of surprised by how uncompetitive some of the games were. I thought the quarterfinals round may have been some of the best basketball that we saw all 2 weeks. Then semifinals, a lot of them were blowouts, and then when we got to the championship game, only one of those games was decided by less than 10 points, and that was the GW and Spring Mills Quad A game, but the rest of them really weren't competitive, and it was a contrast from what we had last year in the boys state championship games, where all four of those games were decided by 3 points, and you might never get a state championship Saturday like that again, and I feel like we kind of had to eat our vegetables this year.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me that I walk away from these 2 weeks, and I know you did a video on this, but to me, the talent in the state is really good. And what I mean by talent is the younger and the underclassmen, especially. I mean, you look at the girls' side. What an unbelievable class coming up. And you got Kaylee Kellogg up at Morgantown, Jariah Pryor, and Rayonna Breckenridge, GW. Hurricanes got some really talented freshmen and sophomores as well. So there's a lot of talent, not only in my area, but your area as well, and across the state as well on the girls' side. Then the boys' side as well. I just think it just bled right over into the following week for the boys' side. I mean, I know we'll kind of touch base, but just and I'm going to echo what you said too, but looking through those all-state lists that we had the previous Sunday, the previous 2 Sundays, I should say, I had a similar thought to you that I said, oh my gosh, this is a really good talent pool in this state. So that was my first takeaway. But the second thing is, and I wrote a column about this, I want to really touch base on this. The state tournament is fun and it's exciting and it's enjoyable whenever these smaller schools and then these southern schools as well, like your Logans, your Wyoming East, your West Sides, are all involved and are also successful on top of that. I know just talking with my dad in the past and my uncle in the past, because they both played basketball in the state, but talking with them, they used to always tell stories about Willie Akers and Herbie Brooks's 50-point game in the state tournament. And just stories like that is what really makes the state tournament one of my favorite events, if not my favorite event all year long. So those are a couple of my takeaways, but I think the biggest thing is just the talent pool in the state, especially in the underclassmen ranks, and then also just how great it is to see Southern schools being being relevant in basketball because, again, everybody talks so much about the North, but it's really good to see these communities come out and really support their teams, especially from the southern areas.
Yeah, and it's always kind of been that way. Like I've always felt like, the South, their big thing has always been basketball. And, I could kind of lump three counties into that between Raleigh County, which is, mostly Beckley, and then Wyoming County, Wyoming East and the feeders and the schools that consolidate into them. And, they're outside of my coverage area, but Mingo County, they talked about it after Rabbit won at Tug Valley on Saturday. I think that was his fourth and the fifth overall for the program, and those Birch teams that won, and then you go back in time to Williamson and those teams that won. There and then you go up to Logan. They've won a lot of basketball state championships as well. So there's just really a nice little stretch there, and what I would call the coal fields that they've had a lot of success, and it's always kind of been a foundational piece here. But yeah, you brought up a good point about a lot of really young, good players, and the state tournament overall. I don't know how it is for your area, but for our area, when I grew up, I had a lot of everybody has a basketball or a football coach as a history teacher or a PE teacher. So you always have these guys that they take that week off. That's a week vacation. It's always substitute teacher week in school that year. Did you have a lot of people? I know you're from the Winfield area. Did you have a lot of people that kind of treated it the same way?
Yeah, a couple of them did. Especially in a town like Winfield. I mean, football is really relevant. Basketball is really relevant with both programs winning titles, both boys and girls for basketball. But it's always just fun to kind of see whenever a team is successful, especially a team in a town like Winfield. That's whenever everybody really rallies together, and you really get the most out of your season during that stretch. I mean, I know when we played in 2018 in our first round game against Westside, I think we had 4 to 6 pep buses, and it was just like a sea of black because our away jerseys were black uniforms. It was just a sea of black, and it was just really cool to see that. And then the following day when we played Chapmanville, it was a sea of green. So just those kind of memories are what sticks with you. And I think a lot of these kids were able to experience that these last couple of weeks.
So you have that unique experience where you stepped on that floor as a player, and I remember that Winfield West Side game because that was actually my first year as a sports writer. That Winfield game, that Winfield team was good with Braden McGrew, but that West Side team, like I genuinely thought they had a chance to be playing for a semifinal and maybe an upset to be in the championship game. They had a really good, starting five. What was it kind of like to step on the floor as a player for that? Because not a lot of us have experience. We talked about last week, but when I played basketball, we lost in the first round of sectionals every year. So we never got that far when we were shooting around in between sessions. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take a shot here, and say I took a shot on the Coliseum floor and go out on top. But as a player and you talked about it. You also had to deal and contend with the Clear Fork Crazies in that cheering section too. What was it kind of like, and how did that kind of set you on the path that you are right now? Because I know basketball really is your biggest thing as a writer.
Well, the first thing I want to mention is I wasn't the star-studded player is what many think I am, or if they think they are, then I'm sorry, I'm just not that at all. As a player, I was more of a glue guy, meaning I was able to, or sponge, I'll say sponge. I was able to soak everything in, kind of learn from my coaches, especially Coach Chris Stevens, and just being able to listen to him, being able to watch what he does as a coach, and kind of being that as a player on the bench. So I want to first establish that. But the second thing is, when you get into the Civic Center, you kind of feel all that history, all that tradition kind of put all together and meshed together. And then the first thing that they always tell you, and I'll never forget this, I think it was an usher that said that, yeah, it was an usher. So whenever a team runs out into the court, there's always an usher standing right there with a Civic Center shirt or an SSAC shirt saying, and they always say, make sure you watch your step. And as always emphasized, and we tell it down the line, we always say, make sure you watch your steps. Whenever you're running through the tunnel, you got to step up onto the court. And I'll never forget a guy behind me, a couple guys behind me, I think, actually tripped on the court on the way up. So they didn't fall completely down, but I kind of like saw in the back of my eye, they kind of like stumbled forward. So that's the biggest thing. But just being able to experience that, because whenever you run out onto the court, it's always great. And the other thing is our coaches, especially Coach Stevens, he always says, always let the away team run out on the court first, because whenever they do that, then you already have a 2-0 advantage. So we always yell 2-0 on before we run out to the court, saying we already have an advantage over the opposing team. That way we can take our time and be able to soak everything in. So when you run out onto that court from the tunnel, you just hear an uproar of just cheering, emotion, enthusiasm, so many different things. It just makes it so worthwhile. Because I think at one point, whenever I was going through the layup lines against Westside, I kind of just stood there at half court and kind of dozed off, and I said, "Man, this is one of those things that you'll never forget." And I got to give props to my guy Braden. You know, I probably had the greatest viewpoint of what he did, but it was late in the game, and we were on a little bit of a stretch. Both teams were going back and forth, and he had arguably one of the. It probably is. I'm gonna say that it's the greatest pass I've ever seen. When he threw that
I
between the
remember
legs
what pass
pass,
you're talking about too. Yeah.
dude, that was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in basketball. Like he threw that ball between the legs. Guy laid it. Sean Hanshaw laid it in for the layup. I honestly went nuts. Like I didn't know how to react, so I kind of just like sunk into the rest of my team and just went nuts. And I just like looked over at the student section. They're jumping around. They're hooping and they're hollering as well. So the state tournament to me is just one of the most special events this side of the Mississippi. I haven't been to a whole lot of tournaments outside of this area, but from what I've heard, this state tournament is really the most magical one that a lot of teams are able to experience whenever they're able to make it to Charleston.
Absolutely. Before we take our first break, I do want to ask you, what was it like playing for Chris? Because one thing I do remember about Chris when he was at Winfield, you guys were in tough regions, and I think there was a game against Poca, a regional game, where where they held the ball and it was like 2-1 at halftime or something like that. And I think he was a little bit famous for doing some of those things at different times. Was that something that he taught a lot of in practice? Take me through that because I am curious.
So that game that you're referring to was a couple of years after. I think that was the COVID year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think that was 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Because I was watching that game. But just playing for Chris. I mean, I put this in a Facebook post, and it kind of just gets me just thinking about my relationship with him. I mean, he's just one of those guys that I was really able just to soak. Like I said, I was able to soak in what he taught me, and he really took a chance on me, which I still never take for granted. I didn't play basketball my junior year of high school after playing my freshman and sophomore year. I started to get back into the flow of things leading into my senior season. And then our former coach had left, and then Chris stepped into the role. And I told him, I said, "You're going to get the best out of me, regardless if I make the team or if I don't make the team, you're going to get the best out of me." And he did. And I really give him a lot of credit because that work ethic that he embedded in me, I give so much props to my dad, but Chris also had a really big role in that as well because he established a work ethic in me that I didn't know that I had, and this is one of the best things about him. He always got the best out of his players, regardless if it was me, Braden, Seth Shalot, whoever it was. I mean, he's such a good coach, and he was able to learn from such a great mentor and his dad, Mel Stevens. So I'm really fortunate and really blessed to be able to play for a guy like Chris.
Yeah, he was actually part of probably my, if not my favorite, my second favorite day of the state tournament. It was that Wednesday of 2021. They kicked it off, so they beat Fairmont Senior in the 2-7 game to end the first session, and then to kick off the second session, Byrd lost to Hampshire in the first 1-8 upset in state tournament history. And then to cap it all off in the nightcap, Wheeling Central, I think it was the Topher kid that
Yep.
hit the game-winning three at the buzzer against Nitro. And I was like, man, like there's no way to ever top a state tournament day like this. And then we had this championship Saturday in 2024 on the boys' side. But it was incredible. So yeah, that guy knows how to win down there. And like you said, that you've learned from one of the best. But we're gonna go ahead and take a break and hear from our sponsors at First Community Bank.
Some see sports as just a game, but it's more than that. It's about building dreams, embracing teamwork, and pushing limits. With every play, every cheer, we're there rooting as partners in their journey. Because at First Community Bank, we believe the youth of today shape our community's tomorrow.
All right, we're back here on the Play Sheet Sports Podcast with Taylor Kennedy of HD Media. Taylor, we talked about it a little bit, but the state tournament really wasn't too memorable. I don't think there were a ton of super memorable games. There really weren't any buzzer beaters. I think the Quad A state championship game on the boys' side was a nice little close game. But as far as all the games around on the boys and girls side, I didn't think there was a ton that was super memorable for me at this point. I think the one that stands out, and it's because of the lack of success, is Cameron shooting. I think 2 of 46 from the field, 5%. Pretty remarkable. But was there kind of a game that really stood out to you this go around?
That's a great question. I mean, I think about that Nitro Wayne championship game. I mean, I go back to the community side of things. I mean, that was just a really fun game just to kind of just soak it all in. I know Nitro was going for their second consecutive title, but just the way that Wayne came out and played, because the first time that they played here in Kanawha County earlier this season, it was just an absolute rock fight. I mean, nobody was able to score. I think both teams scored 30 or less points, but just you could just tell that Wayne was so motivated to win that game. And I thought that those two Atkins twins, Brooke and Addie Atkins, just played unbelievable basketball. And then on top of that, you had Jay Salmons, who hit that 3-pointer, and then she got the bucket and the foul. I mean, that you just hear just an absolute uproar, and that was just so cool just to kind of see her hit that shot and then see everybody just go absolutely bananas. So that was probably my favorite memory on the girls' side. But on the boys' side, I can't discredit the fact that Eli Sankum just looked like an absolute freaking dude in that state title game. Now, no, don't take anything away from what Williamstown did. Williamstown was a fantastic basketball team, but I don't think they were going to be able to stop what Sankum was able to do. I mean, it's the fact that he hits a one-legged bank shot going into the half from the Chick-fil-A logo and just didn't even think twice about it. He just stepped into it one-legged with that left-handed shot. And, I mean, his brother Luke, I honestly think Luke took over. I mean, Luke took over the show. He got the block. He hit some big shots. He got fouled on the Williamstown end of the floor. And he got some chatter from the Williamstown students. So that was a really cool thing. And then I really think that GW Spring Mills game, as you alluded to, that was probably the best game of the whole tournament. I think that game also rivals what we saw in the first round between Logan and Wyoming East. Whenever Logan got that foul call at the buzzer, I don't exactly know the rule necessarily, but I thought the light was supposed to go off, but that's neither here nor there. But nonetheless, that GW game, I think GW surprised a lot of people with how that game was going to go. I thought a lot of people thought that Spring Mills was going to walk into that game, roll by 40 as they did the day before against Spring Valley, and they would go on their way. That game, to me, puts it to a T at how good of a coach Rick Green is. That's just, and I'm not saying that to be biased towards my area. I'm just saying because the size, the athleticism that Spring Mills presented, oh my gosh, to hold them to 41 points after they just hung 92 or 91, that's just a testament to the defensive game plan, but also the coaching of Rick Green as well.
Yeah, I agree because I was watching that game just kind of unfold and I was shooting it from each end and I just kept thinking like GW is really extremely patient. They're not settling for shots. They're not wasting possessions trying to get bad shots off against a team that, Spring Mills length gave them a lot of issues and it took Lewis a lot of opportunities he had to get really crafty in the scoring over some of those guys like Caleb Thomas because they were really long. They were really good. They contested shots extremely well. So everything GW did, there were a lot of acrobatic finishes. But to me, it was a testament to patience. But yeah, I think the games that stood out to me are mostly quarterfinal games. Kaiser Wayne in the first in the girls' side. That was a game that if you're Kaiser, you're probably looking at. They missed a couple layups they probably should have, made. And if you do, Wayne's not playing any further. So then Kaiser wins that game, and who knows what happens. I think Kaiser was like 1 of 7 or 1 of 10 or something down the stretch in the last 4 minutes, and they had quite a few opportunities. And then the Ripley Nitro game on the boys' side was really good and competitive. And you mentioned that the Wyoming East Logan game was just kind of what it's all about there. To me, two of the lessons I really took away from this, which I wouldn't say I took away from it, but I think they were kind of affirmed, is that, nothing's really a guarantee. And to me, it kind of comes down to Nitro and Williamstown. This is something that a lot of us talked about on Media Row, but it felt like Nitro a little bit put a lot of emphasis on the Shady Spring game, heading into it. And, when you see that 2-3 seed, obviously, and it's probably the same way for teams that see Fairmont Senior as well. it's like, okay, we see Fairmont Senior, we feel like if we can get past that hurdle, we're good. And it's probably the same thing for Shady Spring. And Nitro had an axe to grind, rightfully so, because they lost in that semifinal game. But I kind of felt like, and maybe this is wrong, but there was a lot of emphasis put on beating Shady in the semifinal. And that's not to take away from Bridgeport, who was extremely physical with them in the state championship game. But I felt like there was a lot of emphasis put on that. And the other one was, nothing's a guarantee. And this kind of goes for Williamstown. I had a coach in my area tell me as recently as 2 years ago they thought the 2023 Williamstown was the second best team in the state that year, next to Morgantown. They thought they were better than Shady, the James Monroe teams with Eli Allen, and it's because they had all those kids and how good those kids were. And that those kids finished their career without winning state championships in basketball. Now, those that played football did pretty well for themselves, but it's just one of those things where nothing's ever a guarantee. And this is probably the lesson I learned when that group with Shady with the Chapman twins was coming through. They won as sophomores, and they never won again. They graduated with just one ring, which most kids would obviously take the opportunity just to play on the Civic Center court, but they came through, and I thought, wow, they're probably going to run out of here with three consecutive state championships, and that just never materialized. They never won a second one until those kids graduated. So I think that this state tournament was just kind of an affirmation. Just don't count your chickens before they hatch. Don't put too much emphasis on one game, and nothing's ever really a guarantee.
Yeah, I think you and I want to mention my lesson as well, because I think this is really imperative with a lot of these teams that made the state final. I mean, you talk about the two teams in Williamstown and Nitro. Obviously, your ultimate goal each and every year should be winning a state title. That it should be the number one thing that you try and achieve and you try and accomplish on an annual basis. However, a team like Nitro had never made consecutive trips to the state tournament in school history. Think about that. They've been playing basketball long before either you or myself were thought about. So that to me is just a testament to Austin Lowe and the team that he has, or had, I should say. But the other thing is they had never made a state final before. So a lot of that stuff was really new to them. The preparation was probably new, even though the coaches always say that they'd never want to break routine. Sometimes when you play in a game like this, you got to change some things up. You got to try and prepare, get into a different mindset. You are playing for a state title now, other than playing it for the next round. That's the big thing. For the Williamstown side, yeah, those kids never were able to win a state title. Okay. But that should never take away from the fact of what those kids accomplished. They won over 85 games in a 3-year stretch. A lot of them got all-state accolades. I know we'll talk about that here in a second, but what they accomplished should never go unnoticed. And if people diminish that or they never talk about that, that's on them. Because a lot of these kids, and I know you know this, a lot of these kids put a lot of time and effort into the game of basketball, or just any sport for that matter, and they always feel like they underachieved or they never got the best out of themselves. That's not true. The work that you put in is what you're going to get out of it. So a lot of these Williamstown kids didn't win a state title, but to be able to be in a spot like them, teams in this state would die to be in their spot. To be able to play as one of the final two teams, I think any kid, any coach, any team in the state would die to be in a position that Williamstown was in. And I think a lot of these teams in the state championship games for boys and girls were really talented teams. I mean, you look at the Morgantown team; they lost last year to Park. They just lost this year to Spring Valley. They still have really talented players with Sadaya Jones and Kaylee Kellogg and Tatum DeVries. Those girls, I mean, Kaylee's now 0-2 in state finals. Mm-hmm. She's still arguably a top 3 player in the state of West Virginia. So again, you want to work and get a state title, but at the same time, you got to kind of reflect positively and be able to soak in what you were able to achieve in such a short amount of time.
And I think those are the things that age well. The Williamstown thing was one thing that just popped up in my head because Wyoming East is in my coverage area, and they start 3 underclassmen, 2 freshmen. And that's one thing I've seen ramp up is, the expectation that they're going to run off titles. And I just think that there's always a cautionary tale. These things aren't guaranteed. There's always somebody waiting in the background. Like I said, I thought Shady was going to run off titles, and Fairmont Senior was right there, ready to derail them and kind of extend their own little dynasty. And it just happens. And even on the Wyoming East girls side, that group that had Saunders and Lupartis and all that, they, because of injuries and different things, they came away with one title out of that group. And that's something that, and again, like just winning a title is incredible. But I know, like, when you're in that position, like you often look back and think, man, like, what could have been? And like I said, so much of that was out of their control. But it's just one of those things where, you have to keep working. Just one bad day can ruin everything for you. And, I talk about the Nitro thing. I don't necessarily know that this was the case, but I actually go back to a team that Shady head coach Ronnie Olson was on. He played on the Independence team in 2000, and they upset Tug Valley in the semifinals, and it was just an unbelievable upset from anybody that tells the story. So then they meet a Magnolia team that I think was 11-11 or 10-12 or something going into postseason play. And then that had Dave Tallman on it, which is kind of funny. So him and Ronnie jokes all the time. He's like, man, he's been busting me up for years. Uh, but Magnolia beat them after Independence beat the favorite in Tug Valley. I think that was a team that was defending state champs and had Greg Davis on it. But a lot of people had assumed that Independence was probably going to win, and that's not how things unfolded. And I go back even further, and I think it was 1992 when Peterstown had a really good team with a couple kids that went D1 in different sports. The team that was supposed to win it, or they were going to play, was Birch. And Birch ended up losing in the quarterfinals, so Peterstown thought that they were going to win it, and they ended up getting upset by a Herndon team that was in its last year of existence. So yeah, it's there's nothing that's ever a guarantee. So you got to continuously work. You've always got to prepare for these situations. Anything can really happen. And the Wayne girls were almost in a similar situation where I would say since their freshman year, a lot of people had pegged them to win a couple or to win at least a state championship. And in the fourth quarter of that Kaiser game, it was very much in doubt that those kids might graduate without ever having that opportunity. And fortunately, they were able to make the most of it before they graduated and win a ring. But yeah, it's extremely hard. You can never go into any game in Charleston thinking that you've already won before you have. It gets extremely dicey. But we're going to go ahead and take our last break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit about the All-State teams before we close this thing up. First, we're going to hear from our sponsor from Raynell Medical Center.
Raynell Medical Center is proud to offer RMC Lewisburg Pediatrics and Family Health Center, offering quality primary and pediatric care from head to toe. Adult and child well visits, acute visits, ADHD management, behavioral health therapy, parent-child interactive therapy, osteopathic manipulative treatment, lab services, DOT physicals, sports physicals, and more. Our office is open 5 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Call for your appointment today.
Back here on the Play Sheet Sports Podcast, joined by Taylor Kennedy from HD Media. Taylor, we were both in the room for the All-State meetings. For those that are unaware, we do these on Sunday after the state championship games. Prior to the four-class thing, we used to do them the morning of the state championship games, but with the time constraints, we moved that. And I kind of like it. I like being able to see, and I think the state championship game should have a bit of an impact on it. Not too much to sway it, but I think it matters some. I think there's some equity there, but we both kind of talked about it, but the group of young players, and obviously we can't give away too much because we're recording this on Monday night, and I think by the time most people listen to this, the Class A girls will be out, and that's about it. But just some of your takeaways from just seeing these lists.
I think the smartest thing that we did from a sports writers association is go from 8 to 10 players.
I agree.
I think that, to me, it's not that you're trying to add more kids in. It's just you're allowing a bigger pool in a sense. And what I mean by that is, take Quad A, for example. There's so many talented girls basketball players on the Quad A side, and it would have been really difficult for us to just come up with 16 kids. But now that we've expanded to 20 for first and second team, that made things a little bit easier. We were able to, kind of examine things a little bit more in depth, in a sense. I thought that was a really smart move by us. I think a lot of people will be able to realize what went into that thought process. I also think that the senior class that we are graduating is a generational class. Again, we talked about the underclassmen, but just consider these upperclassmen as well. you talk about the first and foremost, the reigning state player of the year in Alexis Borders, who's going on to play collegiate basketball at Duquesne. What an unbelievable career she had. I mean, she won a state title. She's the all-time points leader at. Well, actually, I should probably just say like this. She's probably broken every single record in Wheeling Park girls basketball history. What has she not done? That's first. You look in this area. You talk about Alex Anderson from Hurricane. What a run she had. I mean, I gotta give props to what she was able to do and hang around with Jeremy Young at Hurricane, because Hurricane girls basketball was not known as a basketball program for the longest time. They've always been known as a softball and soccer school, but then now girls basketball is starting to become really relevant. And I give a lot of credit to Alex Anderson in the world of transferring immediately and going anywhere. She stuck around and she saw, and they were one game away. They ran into a buzzsaw in Parkersburg, who I think is going to be a very underrated team next year in Class Quad A. But just the job that they've been able to do, she's a great senior basketball player. Then you look at Nitro with Natalie Smith. What a great career she's had in the high school ranks, and especially in her 2 years at Nitro, getting a ring, scoring a lot of points for Coach Pat Jones. So I think the senior class, we could talk so much about these underclassmen, but these upperclassmen, especially the senior class, is arguably one of the better ones that we've seen in the last couple of years. And I got to give a lot of credit to a lot of the players statewide for the matter. I mean, again, two Atkins twins immediately come to mind again for Wayne. The senior class that Spring Valley has. What a class that is. They were just stacked from top to bottom. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And then on the boys' side, I know that will come out next week. But, you know, again, just this state is so underappreciated for the talent, I think. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that yet. But I'm hoping that when we start filling out and start sending out these all-state lists, they start seeing the classes that these players are in, they're going to be like, okay, we got some talent here. And I hope people will start to realize and appreciate that this state's a really big state in regards to basketball talent. We don't have a big population, but our basketball talent is still really relevant. And I think it's here to stay for the next couple of years.
I do agree, especially like I counted it up, and 27 of the 160 players are underclassmen, which is kind of insane. But yeah, it's been a really good run with a lot of these kids, and I think the future is pretty bright with it. We were both alerted to this, and we had talked about it this past weekend, but the Coaches Association actually released their own all-state list for the first time, and we didn't know the structure format. I we're not immune to this because this happens to us every year on the West Virginia Sports Writers Association side, where we get ripped for our list or our omissions of certain kids. But the coaches seem to really be taking it on the chin today with some of their lists. So that to see them kind of sharing in it, I'm like, well, they have tough jobs as it is. So that I can imagine that only makes it tougher. Because I've had a couple people message me, and I think that they were under the impression that we had something to do with it, and I was like, no, that's entirely on the coaches. And again, not to give too much away, but our lists do vary from theirs in various ways. There were some surprises, some that weren't surprises, but yeah, to me, it is interesting. And this isn't to shade the coaches, because I think there are a lot of them that do it right. But the example I've seen used, and the Sports Writers Association does a very poor job with its soccer all-state list. I'll be honest about that. We just don't have a ton of people that really know the game and know the ins and outs of it, and can understand all the positions. And I'm not exempt from that either. But I think that list has historically been a good example of so often some kids get excluded or blackballed. And I do worry about that with coaches list, and they could probably say the same thing about writers list, where it leans one part of the state. It could be biased or whatnot. I know somebody had that issue a couple years ago when Shady and James Monroe were on those runs. But to me, the one thing I do think that there's a bit of a struggle with is, and you did a story on this too, is a lot of these coaches are and the coaches are very adamant they don't want coaches doing the regional seating. So I wonder how much of that trickles over when you do all state lists, and more power to them for doing them. Obviously, they have a little bit more boots on the ground. They know these kids a little bit better than we do personally in different capacities and the game plan for them and the structures and just the little ways they impact games. But yeah, I kind of am curious to see just kind of see how they kind of interpret it like that because going to the seating thing. Hunter Moles obviously was very upset at Charleston Catholic because he thought they got a raw deal with the seating, and you know, I can't necessarily disagree with him. I saw that team earlier this year that they pushed Wyoming East. They're always competitive under him, and I know in our area, James Monroe getting seated at 3 was pretty controversial. So I always wonder if any of that would leak over into these all-state lists. And again, they coaches could also point the finger at us and say like, hey, like you obviously there's a lot of bias towards your area. But yeah, what did you think whenever you saw the coaches list?
I think I haven't really looked too much into it. I thought a lot of it was correct. I kind of think I think a lot of the kids, if not all of the kids that they mentioned on that list, were kids that were mentioned during our meetings. So that to me shows me that we're right there in regards to agreeing with one another in regards to the talent in the state. That's my first thing. But I lean with you in the standpoint of yes, you will have coaches at certain points kind of undercut another coach and put their kid in instead of a kid that might be better than another team's, for example. And I know I was really outspoken about that in my column, but my whole thought process with that is why. I mean, if a kid is really good and he's good, why are you trying to hold him back from that exposure? Now, granted, you need to do what's best for your guy, but at the same time, you need to do that in a fair manner. And I think a lot of these teams in the state, I think they try and undercut other teams and other coaches. That way they can get their team the best shot to the state tournament. Granted, again, do what's best for you, but do it in a way that's fair and it actually makes sense. So that to me is the biggest thing. And I think a lot of, and that's not just this year thing. That's been around since I was neither you or I were in this job. That should be very known now. This has been a long time thing, but I think now coaches are really starting to get animated, and you're really starting to see them be a lot more outspoken about it. Which, hey, if you want to talk to me about this, I'll hit record and I'll start rolling.
Yeah.
But I'll do it in a way that's professional, and I would hope that coaches would understand that as well. But my thing is, why are you not wanting to do what's best for your team and get them the best shot to Charleston? Because you should be playing your best basketball before you get to Charleston. You should be getting the best out of your players before an all-state list goes out. So I say that because I kind of got a little bit of a coach in me when I say that, but it's just one of those pet peeves of mine. As there's a couple other things that you and I have discussed in regards to the state tournament, which we won't mention, but just no. I think when you see these all-state lists, and it goes back to what I said a couple segments ago, all-state lists are not meant to be the end of the world. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you had a fantastic career, you think you had a great career, you had a great season, don't let 8 to 10 or however many people we have that vote each and every year on all-state lists dictate how your career ended. Don't let that happen. That's my message to so many different people. Don't let these all-state teams get to you, because if you do, then you're really holding back from yourself a lot of good things, because you're just going to focus on that one thing. But there's so many other great things that you accomplished during your career that I really hope kids understand that it again, you can make an all-state list, and I know a lot of teams take pride in these all-state lists, which is great. I'm honored to be a part of one of those people that votes on it, but don't let it be the end of the world. Just don't, because it'll eat you up inside, and you'll have so many what ifs. It just won't sit well. I know it's just one of those things where I really feel for these kids that just don't make it sometimes, and kids that may feel like they need to be on a different team. I agree. I think if anything, I wish the all-state list would just be 25 kids, but we can't do that. We have to condense it down to something that makes sense and reasonable for everybody, and which again I understand and respect. But again, all state lists. Just trust me when I say this. Don't let it dictate how you think your career went, because if you do, it's going to eat you up.
Absolutely. And again, like my comments aren't to shade the coaches. It's just,
Yeah,
a fair discussion about the thought process of it and, just how I've seen it work out with soccer. But yeah, I don't think it defines your career. One example I like to use is just one of my favorite kids to ever cover, Hannah Blankenship from Wyoming East. She was never an all-state player, but her name is in every state tournament book because she is an all tournament. She was an all tournament selection her senior year. I think she may have missed out her junior year, despite having a double double. But you know, somebody they're not gonna people unless they're going out of their way aren't gonna look for those all-state lists. But every time you go to Charleston every March, you're gonna open that program. You're gonna see Hannah Blankenship's name or somebody else's name, that they did the thing that matters when it wins, that they when it comes to winning. They when it matters the most, they did the thing, and that's where they're immortalized. They're in that program, and people talk about it all the time. I'd rather be in that program. And Hannah Blankenship's one of those players that's just forever going to be in that program, and that's what matters most. A lot of these kids, they didn't come away with the state championship. Obviously, only four teams do on each side, but their contributions, like somebody in 20 years or 25 years from now, they're gonna be sitting there with their kid in Charleston Coliseum. They're gonna be flipping through that program. They're like, oh wow, such and such from Chapmanville or East Hardy or so made all tournament, and they're gonna be like, I was there. I remember that. For me, it's always gonna be Skylar Davidson in 2021. Like I'll tell my kids, if I'm ever there with them, like, hey, like. She was unbelievable. 94 of 96 minutes played, this and that. And, it'll always be that way. So that's, to your point, that's ultimately what matters. That's more important than anything all state. I tell most of the people, some of them will have some of the schools like Summers County puts a picture up, and so does Wyoming East if you're an all-state player. But I always tell them, the biggest pictures are those team state championship pictures, and those are the ones that stay up there forever. But
yeah.
yeah, we're getting ready to close this thing out. Taylor, let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Taylor_Kennedy7 for all the latest about what's going on, not only in the tri-state area, but also across the state of West Virginia. You go on our website, wbgazettemail.com, and you can hit our sports tab, go to our high school sports page. Lots of content over the past couple of weeks. I know you did a lot as well. But yeah, that's where you can find me. I do want to say this real quick. I know you and I kind of talked about this last week, but what you've done with this whole thing, I wish I was that, because I'm actually representing the brand that I was actually a part of for a couple of years. But what you've been able to do, hats off to you. I admire it. I appreciate it. I respect the hustle.
I appreciate that, but I couldn't do without a supportive community. All these people that have reached out and just been extremely supportive, and that's basically what's buoyed the whole thing. It's a community of parents and former athletes that I've covered, and just fans of the coverage that have provided me this opportunity to really make this thing sustainable. But speaking of which, I do want to kind of thank our sponsors here: Princeton Healthcare Center, First Community Bank, and Rainelle Medical Center. Without them, we couldn't do all this. But Taylor, once again, want to thank you for coming on. Hopefully, we'll get you on in the future. I'm Tyler Jackson. You've been listening to Play Sheet Sports Podcast. We'll be back with you soon.